what I want to talk to you about today is something you and I talk about frequently offline, and that is not just critical race theory, not just queer theory. Critical race theory, obviously being, as you call it, race Marxism, queer theory being, well, the sexual abuse of children and indoctrination. But how the left has married these two Marxist theories into a strategic assault on our nation's children.
Yeah, that's absolutely a core thing that people need to understand, that, in fact, critical race theory is kind of a minor problem. We spend a lot of energy, a lot of time talking about it, decoding it, understanding what they're doing to racialize circumstances, racialize the children while pretending they're the ones deracializing it. That's the typical, projection there. But what critical race theory mostly does is sets up the move into queer theory or queer Marxism, or the mental and sexual abuse of children, as it might better be phrased. And so the idea is actually stolen from a particular historical character of great fame, Mao Zedong, from China. It is the Maoist strategy. A lot of people don't know their Maoist history, and they don't know that what Mao did to create his Revolutionary Guard out of mostly kids and students was that he created 10 different identity categories. 5 of them he made bad, and 5 of them he made good. The bad ones were the black identities for fascism, and the good ones were the red identities for communism. The black identities, if I can remember all 5 of them on the spot, were rich farmer, landlord, counter-revolutionary, bad influence. That's your moms are domestic terrorists now, by the way. And that's our word for it, is domestic terrorists. And then right-winger. Just not to be too ambiguous about who they're against. Right-winger is the other black category. And the 5 red categories were, for the hammer, you have the laborers. For the sickle, you have the peasants. And then you have revolutionaries, revolutionary cadre members, and revolutionary martyrs. And so what Mao did was, if you, as say an adult or a parent, had one of the black identities, then your children by proxy got a black identity too. If you had a red one, so did your children, probably, depending on how they behaved. If you as a child were labeled a black identity, they treated you worse, they treated you differently, they gave special stuff to the red identity students, and so they created a pressure to move out of the black identities into the red identities. You might maybe denounce your parents. You might rat your parents out. You might go engage in revolutionary activism. You might go desecrate a temple. You might go destroy a statue, something like this. And then you can be in the revolutionary category within the red identities. So he made bad identity categories, treated kids badly if they were in the bad identity categories, and then created a set of solutions to adapt to that pressure, that struggle session style pressure, by giving people an out, which is become a revolutionary for our cause, or I guess a peasant or a laborer, but not as a child. And then you can be free of this stigma that we've attached to you and your identity. Now we come to modern America. You have all these bad identities like straight, white, male, straight female, white female, etc. And you use critical race theory to demonize that racial component tremendously. Can't do anything about your skin color, so what do they tell you are your options? If you're a white person, you can become a racial ally, an anti-racist ally. If you are a person of color, as they like to term it, you can become an activist on behalf of your race. You can become politically black. You can become politically brown. Brown is everybody's favorite race in 2022, the brown race. We had Ayanna Pressley saying, swamp creatures, speaking of swamp creatures, saying that we don't want any more black faces who don't want to be black voices. We don't want any more brown faces that don't want to be brown voices, whatever a brown voice happens to be. But it's a politically active identity. But then they're going to tell you you're never doing it right, especially allyship. White allies are never doing it right. You're recentering yourself. You're putting white privilege forward, blah, blah, blah. But there are other good identities you could adopt. You could become pansexual. You could be demigender. You could be trans. You could be non-binary. And so you adopt one of these queer Marxist identities, political identities, where your sense of self is defined in terms of your politics in opposition to anything within what might be called the normal, whether that's in sex, gender, sexuality, or mental health status, fat status, ability status, etc. You define yourself by being opposed to the normal. And then you have a good identity. So there's a pressure being put on children to fall out of these bad stigmatized identities into these so-called good revolutionary identities. And the process is extra horrific, where we're not dealing with little, Maoists taking to the street or bad naming their parents or whatever else. Instead, what they're doing is voluntarily undergoing chemical sterilization. They're voluntarily signing up for surgeries to cut off their breasts or genitals. They're taking massive amounts of hormones that do incredible, irreparable damage to their bodies at very young ages. They're, according to the state of California now, with Scott Wiener's new bill that just, I think, passed, they have set it up to where that state is now a sanctuary state for LGBTQ, which enables the state of California to steal the parental rights of anybody from any other state. Any child any minor who makes it to the state of California, declaring themselves as an LGBTQ refugee, will be adopted by the state, put into state protective custody, and will begin their social transition and physical transition process accordingly. So they can literally steal your kids from other states. So
that's terrifying.
It's horrifying.
It's literally horrifying. It's I describe it as a 1-2 punch, right? Critical race theory comes in and tells you that you're evil because you're white, not because you demean another race, just because they tell you that your ancestors were racist based on their white skin, and your success or where you are, your privilege is on the shoulders of the white supremacy. And then they offer you a way. It's irredeemable, right? If it's not a choice that you're making or a feeling that you have or a thought process that you undergo. And then they tell you that you can redeem yourself by choosing one of these essentially transgender ideology identities, and they don't care that they're hurting children. Because, in fact, they're willing to hurt children because in the process of removing these children from their families, they're cementing the children as Marxist revolutionaries, because those children are always going to vote Democrat.